The year was 1970, a time when the world was still reeling from the cultural upheavals of the 60s. People were looking for stability, for comfort in the familiar. An unsuspecting nursing student named Donna received an innocuous gift, a Raggedy Ann doll. It was a simple gesture from her mother, meant to bring a touch of home to her new apartment. It seemed like the perfect addition to her apartment, a touch of childhood nostalgia. The doll, with its red yarn hair and stitched smile, was a comforting presence in the otherwise sterile environment. Little did she know, this seemingly innocent doll harbored a dark and terrifying secret, a secret that would soon turn her life upside down. This was no ordinary Raggedy Ann. This doll had a presence, an aura that seemed to shift the atmosphere in the room. This was Annabelle, a name that would soon be etched into the annals of paranormal history. Donna and her roommate Angie first noticed strange occurrences shortly after the doll's arrival. It started with small things that could easily be dismissed. The doll seemed to move on its own. At first it was subtle, a slight shift in position, a tilt of the head. They would find it in different positions. Sometimes it would be lying on its side when they were sure they had left it sitting up. Sometimes it would even be in a different room altogether. They would place it on the couch, only to find it later in the bedroom. These unsettling events, though unnerving, were only the beginning of their nightmare. The atmosphere in the apartment grew heavy, oppressive. The strange occurrences grew increasingly disturbing. Lights would flicker and cold spots would appear in the room. The girls started finding handwritten notes on parchment paper, notes that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The messages, scrawled in a childish handwriting, pleaded for help. They were signed Annabelle. The notes were simple, yet chilling. Fear gripped Donna and Angie. They felt a constant sense of being watched, of not being alone. They couldn't explain the notes. They had no parchment paper in the apartment, and the handwriting didn't match anyone they knew. Where was the parchment even coming from? The mystery deepened, and so did their fear. Desperate for answers, Donna and Angie sought help. They turned to friends, family, anyone who might have an explanation. They contacted a psychic medium, someone who might be able to shed light on the dark presence that seemed to have invaded their home. The medium's findings sent shivers down their spines. The doll, she said, was not what it seemed. The doll wasn't possessed by the spirit of a child, as they had initially suspected. It was something far more sinister. It was a malevolent entity, a demon masquerading as an innocent doll. Its intentions were dark, its presence malevolent, the entity's goal to possess a human host. The doll was merely a conduit, a vessel for something far more dangerous. Donna and Angie were now in a race against time. They had to find a way to rid themselves of this malevolent presence before it could do any more harm. They sought the help of renowned paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens, known for their work with the supernatural, took on the case with a sense of urgency. The Warrens confirmed the medium's findings. The doll was indeed a vessel for a demonic entity. They performed a series of rituals to cleanse the apartment and contain the entity. The doll, now known as Annabelle, was taken to the Warrens' Occult Museum, where it remains to this day locked away in a glass case, a reminder of the dark forces that lurk in the shadows. Donna and Angie, though forever changed by their experience, were finally free from the terror that had haunted them. But the story of Annabelle serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most innocent-looking objects can harbor the darkest secrets. Donna, a young nursing student, lived a simple life with her roommate Angie. They shared a modest apartment filled with the warmth of their friendship and the promise of their future careers. Donna was diligent and focused, often burning the midnight oil to keep up with her demanding coursework, while Angie, with her infectious laughter, provided the much-needed balance to their lives. Their days were filled with studies, laughter, and dreams for the future. They would often stay up late discussing their aspirations and the adventures they hoped to embark on once they graduated. The apartment was their sanctuary, a place where they could be themselves, away from the pressures of the outside world. One day, Donna received a gift from her mother, a seemingly harmless Raggedy Ann doll. It was a nostalgic token reminiscent of Donna's childhood. Her mother thought it would be a comforting presence, a reminder of home amidst the stress of her studies. This doll, with its rosy cheeks and yarn hair, would become a terrifying fixture in their lives. At first glance it seemed like any other doll, but there was something unsettling about its glassy eyes that seemed to follow you around the room. The apartment, once filled with the carefree energy of two young women, began to feel different. The air grew heavy, and an inexplicable sense of unease began to creep into their daily lives. It was as if the very walls of their home were closing in on them. A palpable darkness seemed to settle over the space. The once bright and cheerful apartment now felt cold and unwelcoming. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, and the silence was often punctuated by strange, unidentifiable noises. The doll, initially perched innocently on Donna's bed, began to move. At first, it was subtle, a slight shift in its position, a change in the angle of its head. Donna and Angie would often find it in a different spot than where they had left it. At first, the movements were subtle. They would brush it off, attributing it to their busy minds playing tricks on them. After all, they were both under a lot of stress, and it was easy to misremember where they had placed the doll. The doll would shift positions slightly. Sometimes it would be leaning against the pillows, other times it would be sitting upright. These small changes were easy to dismiss, but they were just the beginning. Donna and Angie would dismiss it as their imaginations. They laughed it off, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, but deep down, both of them felt a growing sense of dread. Then the movements became more brazen. The doll would no longer be confined to Donna's room. It started appearing in different parts of the apartment, places where neither of them had left it. The doll would appear in different rooms altogether. They would find it in the kitchen, the bathroom, even the living room. Each time its lifeless eyes seemed to be watching them, sending chills down their spines. One evening, Donna placed the doll on her bed before leaving for class. She made sure it was securely propped up against the pillows, its familiar spot. Upon returning, she discovered it sitting cross-legged on the living room couch, its lifeless eyes seemingly staring at her. The sight was so unnerving that she called out for Angie, who was equally disturbed by the doll's new location. Fear began to gnaw at the edges of their once peaceful existence. The apartment no longer felt like a safe haven. Every creak, every rustle seemed to be amplified, feeding their growing paranoia. Donna and Angie couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. They began to question their sanity, wondering if the stress of their studies was causing them to hallucinate. The doll's movements were becoming increasingly unsettling. It was no longer just a matter of shifting positions. It seemed to be actively moving around the apartment as if it had a mind of its own. They tried to rationalize the events. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Perhaps they were moving the doll in their sleep, or maybe someone was playing a cruel prank on them. Perhaps there was a draft. They checked the windows and doors, looking for any signs of an intruder or a breeze that could explain the doll's movements. Maybe they were just forgetting where they had left the doll. They started keeping a log of the doll's position, but the entries only confirmed their worst fears. Deep down, they knew something sinister was afoot. The doll was not just a toy, it was a harbinger of horror, a silent witness to the dark forces that had invaded their lives. The strange occurrences escalated beyond the doll's movements. What started as subtle shifts in the doll's position soon became a series of inexplicable events that left Donna and Angie questioning their sanity. Donna and Angie began hearing whispers in the dead of night. These weren't just any whispers, they were soft, almost childlike, yet filled with an eerie, unsettling quality that made the hair on the back of their necks stand up. Soft, unintelligible murmurs seemed to emanate from the doll's corner. The whispers were so faint that they could barely make out any words, but the tone was unmistakably sinister. The whispers sent chills down their spines, leaving them paralyzed with fear. Each night, the whispers grew louder and more persistent, making it impossible for them to sleep. They couldn't pinpoint the source, but the doll's presence loomed large in their minds. Then came the messages. It was as if the entity was trying to communicate with them directly, bypassing the whispers and moving to a more tangible form of contact. Donna and Angie found handwritten notes, seemingly scribbled by a child, appearing in various spots around their apartment. These notes were not just random scribbles. They carried messages that were both pleading and ominous. "Help us," one note pleaded. "Help, Lou," another implored. The notes were desperate cries for assistance, written in a shaky, childlike hand that neither Donna nor Angie recognized. The messages were written on parchment paper, a material they didn't own. This added another layer of mystery and fear, as they had no idea where the paper had come from or how the notes were being placed around their home. Fear morphed into sheer terror. The realization that something otherworldly was trying to communicate with them was overwhelming. They felt trapped in their own home, unable to escape the entity's reach. This was beyond a simple haunting. The entity was intelligent, manipulative, and seemed to have a specific agenda. It wasn't just about scaring them, it was about making contact and establishing a presence in their lives. The name Annabelle began appearing on the notes. This was the first clue that the entity had an identity, a name that it wanted them to know. The entity, it seemed, was revealing its name. Annabelle. The name carried a weight, a sense of history and tragedy that they couldn't yet understand. Donna and Angie, desperate for answers, delved into the history of their apartment building. They spent hours in libraries and archives, searching for any information that could explain the haunting. They uncovered a tragic story. A young girl named Annabelle had lived in the building many years ago. Her life had been cut short under mysterious circumstances, leaving her spirit restless and seeking closure. A young girl named Annabelle had died on the property many years ago. The details of her death were vague, but it was clear that her spirit had not found peace. The spirit of the young girl, it seemed, was trapped. Annabelle's ghost was bound to the place where she had met her untimely end, unable to move on to the afterlife. Driven by a mix of fear and compassion, Donna and Angie sought to help the spirit they believed was haunting them. They felt a deep sense of responsibility to assist Annabelle in finding peace, even if it meant putting themselves at risk. They reached out to a psychic medium, hoping to communicate with Annabelle and guide her towards the light. The medium, with her experience in dealing with spirits, seemed like their best hope for resolving the haunting. Little did they know, they were walking into a trap. The entity had lured them in, playing on their empathy and desire to help. The séance would not bring the peace they sought, but rather, it would deepen the connection with the malevolent spirit. The entity had lured them in, playing on their empathy. It was not the spirit of a young girl seeking help, but something far more sinister, using the guise of innocence to ensnare them in its web.